The sun was bright, the sky was clear, and everything was perfect. The chairs were arranged, flowers decorated the hall, and guests arrived in colorful clothes. Laughter filled the air. The photographer snapped endless pictures. A young woman named Grace, 27 years old, stood in her white gown, glowing like a diamond. She had waited for this day all her life. For the past 5 years, she had been with Raymond, the man she loved deeply. He was charming, wealthy, and everyone said she was lucky to have him. She believed it too. Raymond had promised her the world, and Grace trusted him with all her heart. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. But as the clock ticked past noon, a strange silence began to creep in. People began whispering. The groom was not picking calls. The best man had disappeared. Her father looked uneasy. Her mother kept pacing the floor. Grace stood still, her hands sweating, her smile fading. Then a family friend walked in, holding a phone, and whispered to her father. One look at her father's face told her everything. Raymond wasn't coming. He had flown out of the country that morning with another woman. The wedding was a lie. The invitations, the promises, the plans, all fake. He had used her, taken her savings, and vanished. Grace felt her knees buckle. Her world shattered in seconds. Guests slowly started leaving. Some shook their heads. Others took photos for gossip. Her dress, once beautiful, now felt like chains. Her heart was broken, humiliated in public, and left with nothing. That night, Grace locked herself in her room, cried until her voice broke, and promised herself she would never love again. But life wasn't done with her. Because sometimes, the road to true love begins at the edge of heartbreak. Days turned into weeks, and the pain in Grace's heart refused to go away. She stopped answering calls, deleted her social media, and refused to leave the house. The wedding decorations were still packed in boxes, mocking her. Everyone had moved on, but she was stuck in the same place, asking herself why. Why did Raymond lie? Why did he waste 5 years of her life? Her job as a customer care officer had already been left months earlier, because Raymond promised to take care of her. Now, she had no money, no job, and no peace. One morning, her best friend, Ella, forced her to go for a walk. "You can't sit here and cry forever," Ella said gently. "Let life see you again." Grace didn't want to go, but she did. That walk changed everything. At the park, they sat under a tree where children played and people smiled. Grace watched them quietly, still feeling empty. Just then, a little girl ran past and bumped into her. "I'm sorry," the girl said, then ran back to a man sitting nearby. He looked up and smiled at Grace with kind eyes. That smile lingered in her mind. 2 days later, Grace returned to the park alone. She didn't expect anything, but the man was there again, sitting in the same spot, drawing in a small sketch pad. The little girl waved at Grace and ran to her. "Hi, you're the pretty lady from the other day," the girl said. The man stood up, smiled again, and nodded. But he didn't speak. Instead, he used his fingers to sign something to the girl, who then turned and said, "My uncle said thank you for being kind to me." Grace was surprised. The man was deaf. His name was Daniel, and he was a full-time artist who raised his little niece after his sister passed away. Though he couldn't speak, his drawings said more than words ever could. Grace found herself coming back every day. They began communicating through notes, hand signs, and laughter. Slowly, she began to smile again. Not the fake smile she wore before, but a real one that came from somewhere deep inside. Daniel never asked about her past. He just gave her peace. And after everything she had been through, that peace was more powerful than any sweet words. But just when she started to open her heart again, Raymond came back. It was a quiet evening. The sky was golden, and Grace was back at the park, sitting beside Daniel while he sketched. She watched him draw a picture of a bird flying out of a cage. It felt like her life. Free at last. For the first time in weeks, she was starting to breathe without pain. But peace doesn't always last forever. As they were getting ready to leave, Grace's phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. She ignored it. Then a message came in. "I'm sorry, Grace. Please meet me. I came back for you. Raymond." Her chest tightened. She stared at the screen like it might disappear. Daniel noticed her change in expression. She quickly smiled and waved it off, but inside, her heart was shaking. The next day, Raymond came to her parents' house. He wore expensive clothes and a fake smile. He claimed he had made a mistake, that the woman he ran away with had scammed him and disappeared with his money. that he was lost without Grace, that he had returned to make things right. He even knelt down, holding out a small ring, asking for a second chance. Grace just stared at him. He didn't come back for love. He came back because he had nowhere else to go. And suddenly, she saw clearly, Raymond had never loved her. He loved what she gave him, her trust, her care, her loyalty. And he used it all. That night, Grace sat in her room, thinking about everything. She could go back and pretend it never happened. She could accept him and continue the life they once planned. Or she could choose a new story, a better one, a real one. The next morning, she went back to the park. Daniel was waiting there, as always. She walked up to him, smiled softly, and gave him a note. He opened it. Someone from my past came back, but I choose peace. I choose now. I choose you. Daniel looked at her, eyes wide with emotion. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. He simply pulled out a small drawing he had been working on all morning. It was of Grace, smiling, strong, and free. She didn't cry this time. She laughed, because love had finally found her, not in promises, not in wealth, but in peace. After that quiet confession in the park, everything changed for Grace, but not in the way people expected. There was no big proposal, no dramatic public moment. There were no roses or loud declarations. Just calm, quiet moments filled with real connection. Daniel and Grace began spending more time together. Their days were simple: walks through quiet streets, visits to art galleries, cooking small meals together. Grace started learning sign language, slowly but surely. With every new sign she mastered, Daniel's smile grew wider. He made her feel seen, not because of how she looked, not because of what she could give, but simply because she existed. Daniel was patient. He never rushed her. He never asked about Raymond. He never questioned the pain she still carried. Instead, he gave her space to heal, space to grow, space to laugh again. And Grace began to bloom. She got a part-time job teaching children how to read. Her laughter came back, full and deep. Her family noticed the difference. Even her mother, who once begged her to forgive Raymond, now said, "This man, he brings light to your eyes." One evening, as they sat under the mango tree in Daniel's backyard, he handed her a sketchbook. She flipped through it slowly. Every page was a part of their story. Her sitting at the park bench, her smiling with his niece, her wiping her tears the first time they met, her dancing barefoot in the kitchen, her learning her first sign. And on the last page, her face drawn beside his, two hearts joined by a single line. Below it, in tiny neat writing, he had drawn one word: forever. Grace looked at him. He didn't kneel. He didn't say anything. He just held her hand, and she nodded, tears filling her eyes, not from pain, but from a deep, gentle joy. In that moment, she realized something powerful. Love doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it whispers. But when it's real, you feel it in your soul. The days that followed were the softest Grace had ever known. Her mornings began with messages drawn on sticky notes by Daniel. Little sketches of coffee cups, smiling suns, and hearts with wings. His niece, Hannah, would run to hug her whenever she came over. Even the silence in his home felt comforting, like a warm blanket wrapping around her heart. She no longer looked back. Raymond tried to reach her again. He sent gifts, begged through emails, even showed up once outside her new workplace. But Grace didn't open the door. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She had healed too much to bleed again. Instead, she gave the gift basket to a homeless woman on her street, smiled, and walked on. Love had changed her. Not the kind that breaks promises, but the kind that keeps them quietly. The kind that listens without sound and speaks straight to the soul. One weekend, Daniel invited Grace and her parents to his art exhibition. It was the first time they were all meeting properly, and Grace was nervous. Her father was a quiet man, the type who judged without speaking. Her mother was warm, but protective. They arrived, unsure of what to expect. But within minutes, her parents were drawn in. The exhibition was called Healing in Colors. Every painting told a story of pain, survival, and silent strength. One painting caught everyone's eye. It was a woman in a torn wedding dress, standing at a crossroads, one road dark, the other lit with soft gold. It was titled, "She Chose Light." Everyone in the room knew it was Grace. Tears filled her mother's eyes. Her father nodded slowly, a small smile breaking his usually serious face. He turned to Daniel, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said only 2 words, "Thank you." That evening, Grace and Daniel walked hand in hand under the moonlight. There were no big words, just hearts that had found home in each other. And that was enough. Weeks passed, and life unfolded in the most beautiful, ordinary ways. Grace moved into a small apartment closer to Daniel's place, not out of need, but out of joy. Every evening felt like a gift. She would return from work to find a flower pressed between pages of a book, or a fresh drawing tucked into her handbag. Daniel had a way of speaking love without ever saying a word. She had once believed love needed to be loud to be true. Now, she understood the beauty of quiet love. They cooked together, laughed over spilled rice, painted walls with mismatched colors, and stayed up late making memories that didn't need filters or approval. When it rained, they danced barefoot on the balcony. When it was sunny, they took long walks, fingers lightly interlocked. Daniel's niece, Hannah, became like a little sister to Grace. Together, the three of them became a kind of family, one built not by blood, but by choice. One afternoon, Grace received a letter. It was from a publishing house. She had secretly submitted an article she wrote about surviving heartbreak and finding peace. The piece had touched someone deeply, and they wanted her to write a full collection of stories about healing, love, and second chances. Grace was shocked. She had never seen herself as a writer. She had simply written from her heart, hoping her pain might help someone else feel less alone. That night, she told Daniel. He smiled wider than ever and pulled out a small canvas where he had drawn her, sitting at a desk, with words rising from her notebook like butterflies. He pointed to the butterflies and signed, "Your words set others free." Grace hugged him tightly. She finally knew what it meant to be loved in full. Not for what she could offer, not for her past, but simply for being herself. She began writing every morning before work. At night, Daniel read over her shoulder, correcting small things and adding quiet encouragement with his eyes. And slowly, her story began to take shape, not just on paper, but in life. She had found love not at the altar, but in the quiet spaces in between. Grace's book slowly took shape, each page filled with truth, softness, and quiet strength. She wrote about heartbreak, not with bitterness, but with honesty. She shared how it felt to be left on her wedding day, how pain almost swallowed her, and how a man who never spoke a word taught her how to truly live again. The publishers were amazed. They called her writing gentle fire, the kind that warms, not burns. They agreed to release the book nationwide and gave her a chance to speak at a women's healing conference. The event was huge, with guests from all over the country. Grace stood on stage in a simple dress, her heart pounding. As she faced the crowd, she thought of her past self, the girl in the white gown, standing in confusion as her world fell apart. She took a breath. Then she spoke, not with anger, not with shame, but with peace. She spoke about letting go, about waiting for the kind of love that doesn't rush or break or leave, about finding strength in unexpected silence. The room went still. Many women wept. Some stood to clap even before she finished. That night, her story went viral. Her book became a bestseller within a week. People began sending her messages from across the country, thanking her, telling her how her words helped them leave toxic relationships, how they had found the courage to start over. Grace no longer just healed from her pain. She became a healer. Back home, Daniel smiled as he watched it all unfold. He didn't like crowds, but he always stood by her, quietly cheering in his own way, through his art, his signs, and his presence. One evening, Grace returned from a book signing to find the lights off in her apartment. She opened the door, confused. Then the lights slowly came on. There was soft music playing, and candles lit across the room. At the center, Daniel stood, holding a small sign. It read, "You've healed the world. Let me protect your heart." He knelt down and opened a small box. Inside was a ring, handcrafted, with a tiny paintbrush carved into the side and her name gently etched beside it. Grace's heart stopped. Tears fell freely as she nodded. It wasn't the wedding she once dreamed of. It was better, because this time it was real. The wedding was small. No glitter, no headlines, no crowd. Just the people who mattered. It was held at a quiet garden, under the shade of blooming trees. Butterflies fluttered lazily, birds sang in the distance, and laughter flowed like music. There were only 20 guests, close friends, family, and a few girls from Grace's reading group. Even Daniel's art students came with tiny hand-drawn cards. There were no bridesmaids, no tuxedos. Just love. Daniel wore a simple cream-colored suit. Grace wore a soft, flowing dress made by a local designer. No heavy jewels, just a necklace with a butterfly charm to remind her of where she started. She walked down the aisle not to a choir or violin, but to the sound of soft wind and whispered blessings. Daniel stood waiting with a sign in his hands. You didn't just walk into my life. You lit it. The guests smiled, some teared up. The vows were short. No one said too much. They didn't have to, because everything had already been said through the way they looked at each other, with knowing eyes, with quiet joy. When it was time for the kiss, Grace laughed through her tears, and Daniel gently pulled her close. It wasn't grand. It was pure. Later, instead of a big reception, they shared food under the trees. Home-cooked meals. Laughter. Stories. Daniel gifted her a portrait he had painted in secret. A picture of her standing in sunlight, barefoot, with broken chains behind her and flowers blooming where her tears had once fallen. She held it to her chest and whispered, "This is more than I ever dreamed." They danced slowly under the stars. No DJ, no stage, just hands, hearts, and hope. And that night, when they got home, Grace didn't feel like she was entering a new life. She felt like she was finally stepping into the life she was meant for all along. 1 year later, the home Daniel and Grace built together was filled with more than just art and books. It was filled with peace. Their days were simple but full. Daniel continued to paint, now with Grace as his full-time muse. He had opened a quiet art center for children with hearing loss, where he taught them how to express their voices through color and shapes. Grace ran her reading club and was working on her second book, this one about learning to trust again. She titled it, The Soft Strength of Silence. Together, they made it their mission to help people heal, not through big speeches, but through presence, through example. Their home became a place where broken people found comfort. People who had been jilted, cheated, silenced, abandoned, came, sat, listened, and left with hope. Grace often looked back on her life and smiled. That rainy day in a white gown felt like a lifetime ago. Back then, she thought love had to be dramatic and loud. But now she knew, love is patient. Love is calm. Love is safe. Love stays. On their first anniversary, Daniel surprised her with a painting titled, The Wedding That Saved My Life. It showed two people standing side by side, not in a grand hall, but in a garden, under the open sky, surrounded by soft colors and light. It made her cry all over again, not from sadness, but from how far she had come. She placed the painting beside her writing desk and wrote her final chapter in the new book that night. I was left at the altar, but I found someone who met me at the garden. I lost a wedding, but I gained a home. Sometimes, life doesn't give you what you expected. It gives you something better. A broken heart is not the end. Sometimes, it's the beginning of something more real. The loudest love isn't always the truest. True love speaks even in silence. Peace is a gift. Never exchange it for temporary excitement. Don't chase the ones who walk away. Trust the ones who stay. Healing is possible. Love, even after heartbreak, is possible. If Grace's story touched your heart, please like, comment, and share this video. Let someone who's hurting know they're not alone. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real, emotional, and inspiring stories that prove love always finds a way.